From the Manticore of the second episode to the changelings that invaded in the season 2 finale, Equestria is filled to the brim with interesting beasties and buggies of ancient folklore. Anyone who studies mythology has probably had a nerdgasm at least once from watching this show, and we can all agree the writers deserve props for doing their research. There's probably never been a time when they've interpreted one of these ancient animals incorrectly. Or has there? Out of all the things I hate, having to pick apart episodes of the show for the sake of saying the people working on it were wrong is definitely close to the top. After all, I know firsthand how annoying it can be for people to say you didn't do your research properly, especially when they actually make good points. So, to any workers at Hasbro who are for some reason watching this unknown brony rant about ideas popping into his head that led him to start cracking open books and googling things left and right, first off, sorry in advance, and second off, how did you even get to this video? But enough about that. For the most part, the mythological creatures represented were very close to their origins. The Chimera from Some Pony to Watch Over Me is a good example of surprising accuracy. They got it right about the Chimera being female and composed of 3 animals, and the fire-spewing swamp is clearly a reference to how the Chimera in original mythology breathes fire. Sure, they used a tiger instead of a lion and had the goat head in the wrong place, it's supposed to be coming from its back, but you know, that wasn't really too important in the grand scheme of things. However, there were some cases where the creature wasn't portrayed accurately. For example, the Manticore from the second episode was portrayed as being basically a winged lion with a scorpion tail, but in Persian folklore where the Manticore originated, it's similar to a sphinx. It has the body of a red lion and the head of a human, shoots poisonous spines from its tail, and has 3 rows of teeth like a shark. But this can be overlooked, since in the episode, the Manticore was supposed to be more of a reference to the tale of Androcles. Androcles? 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 Androclesbian? Something like that. Androcles, a runaway slave who found a wounded lion with a thorn in its paw. After removing the thorn, the lion became more like a dog and grew friendly to Androcles. Fluttershy, removing the thorn from the Manticore's paw, is like Androcles in this regard. So in a way, the Manticore wasn't really inaccurate to mythology, it was just a reference to a different myth. But now, I'm going to bring up the cockatrice, the chicken-headed lizard that turned ponies to stone. Well, first off, the original cockatrice was a rooster-headed dragon. Sure, that's nitpicking a little, but I feel the need to point it out. As for the turning ponies to stone, that is in fact accurate, though said turning to stone was supposed to be instant and irreversible. Most other things, such as it flying and only having 2 legs, are accurate. Dragons. I'm not even going to tackle them. There's no right or wrong with dragons, since all that's official about them is they're giant fire-breathing reptiles. So yeah, MLP, you do what you want with dragons. Changelings, though... The show presents changelings as bug-like alicornish creatures who feed on love and can change shape. None of this is true to the original myths. In folklore, changelings are the offspring of a legendary creature, such as a fairy or a troll, who has been left in the place of a human child. This was done by other fairies or trolls to prevent inbreeding between humans. The reason for the name changeling was not because they could change form, but likely because they were caused by an exchange of a fairy with a human child. They're never mentioned to feed on love, to be bug-like, to change shape. Heck, the changelings we see in the show are closer to succubi than anything. But yeah, I guess if you're making a children's show, you can't really make a reference to a succubus without upsetting parents more than when you give a gray Pegasus a voice. But let's go to the exact opposite end of the spectrum here. From creatures that feed on love, in the show, let's go to creatures that feed on hate, in the show. The windigos. In original mythology, these were called wendigos, but admittedly, windigo is one of many variations. Wendigos in folklore were associated with winter and the cold, the show certainly got that right. Also, they were linked with famine and starvation, and were an embodiment of gluttony and greed, represented in the heartwarming Eve tale by the 3 tribes all starving from lack of food, and when they set out to find new land, they argued over who got the land when they all found the same perfect paradise. They wanted things for themselves and didn't care about the other tribes. However, they were off on a few details. Wendigos didn't feed on hatred, nor were they attracted by arguments between people. Instead, they were associated with cannibalism, and humans who fed on other humans could turn into a Wendigo themselves. This was a warning of sorts thought up by northern Algonquian cultures, as cannibalism was considered to be a horrendous crime, even if it was to save your life. The myth that eating another human turned you into a Wendigo was deterrent enough against people trying it. Oh, and if you think becoming a giant creature of snow and ice would be cool, pardon the pun, think again, viewers. When a wendigo ate, it grew in size equally proportionate to its meal, meaning it would never be full and would always be hungry, hence their apparent gluttony and bottomless pits of a stomach. Wendigos were malevolent creatures linked with starvation, but they too were always famished, making their interpretation a sort of double-edged sword. They're symbols of gluttony and greed, but also symbols of famine and hunger, because they were both at all times. So while they got the basics figured out, the writers didn't portray wendigos quite right in comparison to their mythological origins. But just like with the changelings and or succubi, I guess cannibalism isn't really a topic you can feel safe touching on in a kids show. And while I haven't talked about every single creature to appear, I'm thinking that's enough to make my point here. The writers may have portrayed some creatures with stunning accuracy, but they can't be perfect all the time. Sometimes maybe they'll write something that doesn't feel right to us and we just label as wrong without considering such simple things as how it was done like that for a specific reason. Maybe it happened to make a joke, or maybe it was important to advance the plotline. Oh, am I still talking about the use of mythological creatures? You decide, viewers. You decide. But there you have it. A manticore who's actually a lion, changelings who are actually succubi, chimeras who are actually not supposed to look that way, goat head. This show may get a major reaction out of mythology buffs, but you can bet bits to bagels it gets a bigger one out of nitpickers like myself. Maybe that's a bad thing, maybe it's not. Either way, it's something for you to think about. For the most part, the mythological creatures represented were very close to their oranges. Wait, what? Did I just say?